Lucas's hands were shaking. Not from the February cold, the kind that settles into bone, but from a clarity he could no longer outrun. 19 years trying to shape himself into something acceptable had finally collapsed into a single, unbearable truth. He didn't fit anywhere, not even inside his own skin. The bridge rail was firm beneath his palms. Behind him lay his parents' silent house, his father numbing himself in front of the TV, his mother pretending to sleep through her worry. His brother David, the golden one, the son who made sense, was hours away in Houston living a life Lucas was never allowed to want. A note sat folded in his jacket. Not for drama, just the last thing he knew how to give. He had tried everything else. Counseling, church, prayers said the way they expected, school dances with girls he couldn't feel anything for, shrinking himself, disappearing, becoming smaller, then nothing. The town below was dark, dotted with farm lights belonging to people who'd known him his whole life without ever really seeing him. To them, he'd always been the quiet one, the strange one, the mistake. His phone buzzed. His mother again. He turned it off. Then headlights. A truck slowed near the bridge. Not an old work truck, but something newer, expensive, owned by a man whose life hadn't been cheap or easy. The window rolled down. The man's face held years of sun, labor, and something else. Loss, maybe. He looked at Lucas not with shock or curiosity, but recognition, like he'd stood in the same darkness once and barely made it back. "Step back from that rail, son," he said. Not loud, not harsh, just certain, like someone who wasn't asking. For the first time all night, Lucas felt seen, not looked at. Seen. James didn't ask questions. He just opened the passenger door and waited, engine running, letting Lucas decide if he wanted to stay on that bridge or get in the truck. It took maybe 30 seconds. Lucas moved. His legs didn't feel like his, but they carried him to the truck anyway, and he sat down hard on the seat, breathing like he'd just run for his life. James drove, not toward town, not toward any visible destination, just away from the bridge. The radio was low, some country station neither of them was really listening to. After a while, James pulled into an all-night diner called Miller's, the kind of place that had been there for 40 years, and would probably be there for 40 more. The parking lot had 3 other cars, the kind of middle-of-the-night quiet that belonged to people who had nowhere else to be. Inside, it smelled like burnt coffee and bacon grease. The waitress, a woman in her 60s named Pat, who'd served James coffee every Tuesday for the last decade, didn't react to Lucas looking like he'd been pulled from a grave. She just poured 2 cups and left them on the table. James ordered pie, just pie. He didn't ask Lucas what he wanted, he just ordered for both of them. Apple pie, still warm, with vanilla ice cream that melted into the warm filling. Lucas hadn't eaten in 2 days. He didn't realize it until the first bite. They sat there for almost 2 hours. James told him about his farm. 40 acres, cattle. The way February was the hardest month because everything was waiting to grow and you couldn't do anything but wait. He talked about the town like he belonged to it, like he was rooted here in a way Lucas had never felt rooted anywhere. He didn't ask Lucas his name until they were leaving. "Lucas," the boy said quietly. James nodded like he'd already known. Maybe he had. 3 days later, Lucas was still alive. He'd slept on James's couch that first night, waking to the smell of coffee and eggs frying. James had left him alone, hadn't forced conversation, hadn't treated him like he was fragile or sick, just made breakfast and left a plate on the coffee table with a note that said, "Eat. I'll be back around 6. When James returned, covered in dust and sweat from work, Lucas was sitting on the porch. He hadn't planned to be there. His body had just carried him outside when the wall started feeling too small. "You're still here," James said. Not a question. "I don't have anywhere else to go," Lucas said. James nodded like this made perfect sense. "You work?" "I was at a grocery store. They let me go last month." "Why?" It wasn't cruel the way James asked, just direct. Lucas appreciated that. No pity in it. "They found out. One of the other guys saw me at a place in the next town over." James climbed the porch steps and sat down next to Lucas without being invited. "You like working?" "I like not thinking. I've got work, if you want it." Lucas looked at him, really looked at him. James was older, the kind of 52 that came from living instead of just existing. His hands were rough, calloused in specific ways. His face had lines that looked like they came from smiling once, a long time ago, and then stopping. "Why are you doing this?" Lucas asked. James was quiet for a long moment. He looked out at the land in front of his house, acres of empty waiting earth. "I had a son," James said finally. 22 when he died. Car accident 6 years ago. He was the kind of kid who saw people, really saw them. He would have stopped for you on that bridge." Lucas felt something crack open in his chest. Not the good kind of crack, the kind that hurt. "I'm not him," Lucas said. "No," James agreed. "But you're someone, and you're here. That matters." They sat in silence as the sun started to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that felt like they belonged to a different world than the one Lucas had been living in. James didn't try to fill the quiet. He just existed next to Lucas, solid and present, like he was showing him what it looked like to take up space and not apologize for it. "The work starts at 6 in the morning," James said as the light faded. "You'll need boots. I have extras. And you'll be sore as hell." "Okay," Lucas said. "Okay? Yeah, okay." For the first time in as long as he could remember, Lucas had said yes to something without hating himself for it. The first week, Lucas's hands blistered. By the second week, they were calloused. By the third week, his body had learned the rhythm of work, fence repair, feeding cattle, the endless small tasks that made up a farm's life. James never talked while they worked. He just showed Lucas what needed doing, and Lucas did it. The real conversation happened during lunch. James packed 2 sandwiches every day. They'd sit under the oak tree near the eastern pasture, and James would talk, not asking questions, just talking. About the land, about why February was his worst month, something about the waiting, about how his wife used to plant seeds indoors in February, even though the ground wasn't ready, just to have something growing while everything outside was dead. "She died?" Lucas asked one day, mouthful of turkey sandwich. "Cancer. 12 years ago. Same year my boy was born, actually. Different years. You lost them close together." "I lost them," James said simply. "My wife first. My son 6 years after that. That's when I really started wondering what the point was." Lucas understood that in a way he couldn't explain. The second week, James brought Lucas into town for supplies. They went to the hardware store, the feed store, the grocery where Lucas used to work. Nobody said anything to Lucas directly, but he felt the looks. James just walked next to him like it was normal. Like there was nothing strange about a 52-year-old millionaire farmer spending his afternoon with a 19-year-old nobody. At the grocery store, the manager, Tom, who'd fired Lucas, actually looked uncomfortable when James picked up items next to him. James didn't acknowledge it. He just bought what he needed and left with Lucas. "You don't have to do that," Lucas said in the truck. "Do what?" "Walk around with me like you're not worried what people will think." James glanced at him. "I'm not worried, are you?" "Yeah, a lot. That's your family's voice in your head. Not everyone in this town thinks the way your family does. They're just louder." That night, James showed Lucas the photo. His wife, a woman with a bright smile and kind eyes, and his son, who had James's face but softer, less weathered. They were at a fair, both holding cotton candy, both looking like they belonged to a life that made sense. "What was his name?" Lucas asked. "Michael, Mike. He would have liked you," Lucas said. It wasn't true exactly. He didn't know, but it felt true. James smiled. Actually smiled. Not the half smile he usually gave. "Yeah, I think he would have liked you too." That weekend, James invited Lucas to stay. Not as charity, as fact. "You're staying," he said. "Your room is upstairs, left side. There's clean sheets in the closet." Lucas moved his few belongings from the couch to the room upstairs. It was simple, just a bed, a dresser, a window that looked out at the land. James had left a lamp on the nightstand and a small stack of books on the dresser. For the first time since he could remember, Lucas had somewhere to be. The invitation came on a Thursday morning while they were mending fence. "My sister's coming to dinner Sunday," James said, not looking at Lucas. "She comes every month. Brings her husband, their kids." Lucas stopped working. "I can go somewhere else that day." "No, you won't." "James, my sister already knows you're here. The whole town does, and half of them have probably called her. She's curious. Doesn't much care what people think. You'll like her." Sunday arrived with rain that turned the roads into mud. James's sister arrived anyway. A woman in her mid-50s with James's eyes and a no-nonsense way of moving through the world. Her name was Catherine. Her husband was quiet, kind, the type who'd been married to Catherine long enough to just let her lead. Their kids, a boy and girl, both in their 20s, seemed normal in the way most people seemed normal, like they didn't have to think about fitting in. Catherine hugged James, then looked at Lucas with the same directness James used. "You're the bridge boy," she said. Lucas felt his stomach drop. James had told her. Of course he'd told her. "Catherine," James said, warning in his voice. "What?" "I'm stating fact." "Hello, bridge boy. I'm Catherine. James doesn't talk much, but I do, so you're going to hear a lot from me. Fair warning." She made a pot roast. The kitchen filled with steam and the smell of beef and vegetables, and for a moment Lucas forgot that this wasn't his family, that he didn't belong here. Over dinner, Catherine talked about her kids' jobs, about James's stubborn refusal to sell parcels of land to developers, about how he'd been a ghost the last 6 years, and she was glad someone had finally dragged him back to living. "Mom," James's nephew said, embarrassed. "What?" "It's true. Uncle James was drowning. Now he's less drowning." She looked at Lucas while she said it. Not unkind, just seeing. After dinner, Catherine pulled Lucas aside while James and her husband cleaned up. "He's grieving," she said. "Still, it doesn't stop, you understand that?" "I think so," Lucas said. "Mike was a good kid. Funny. Smart. He would have liked someone like you. Someone with a spine. Someone who doesn't apologize for existing. James sees that in you. That's why he stopped the truck. I don't know if I'm worth—" "That's not your job, deciding if you're worth something to him. Your job is just to show up. That's all he needs." When Lucas and James drove Catherine to her car later, she hugged Lucas like he was already part of the family. "Come back next month," she said. "And don't let my brother get moody. He's terrible when he gets moody." James was quiet on the drive home, but not the bad kind of quiet. The kind where someone is thinking about something that matters. "That go okay?" he finally asked. "She called me Bridge Boy. She calls me Moody. We all have nicknames. What's yours?" "For her? The ghost who lived in the farmhouse." Lucas looked at him. "You're not a ghost anymore." James reached over and squeezed Lucas's shoulder. Brief, solid, real. "No," he said. "I'm not." Time moved differently on the farm. Spring came. The land went from waiting to alive. James planted new crops, and Lucas learned to tell the difference between plants worth keeping and weeds that had to go. They fell into a rhythm that felt ancient. Wake before dawn, work until the light started to fail, come inside to eat. Some mornings, James would bring Lucas coffee on the porch before the sun came up. They'd sit in the dark, barely talking, just existing in the same space. It was enough. By April, Lucas started going to town by himself. He got a job at a diner different from Miller's, Rosie's Place, where the owner was a woman in her 60s who'd lived her whole life openly, unmarried, in a town that probably had opinions about that. She hired Lucas without hesitation. "Work hard, don't steal, and be kind to the customers," she said. "Everything else doesn't matter." He'd walk to work, and James would pick him up after his shift. It became their routine. Lucas coming out of the diner, seeing James's truck parked in the same spot, getting in and James asking, "How was it?" Not because he particularly cared about diner drama, but because he wanted to know about Lucas's day. Somewhere in the routine, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. It was the opposite of dramatic. It was Lucas noticing that he was happy in a way he'd never been happy before. It was the ease of existing in a space where nobody was waiting for him to be different. It was James, watching Lucas laugh at something stupid, and his face doing something that looked almost like peace. In May, they went to the county fair. James didn't plan it. He just casually mentioned that he was going. And did Lucas want to come? They bought fair food that was terrible for them and stood in line for a Ferris wheel. When they got to the top, the whole county was visible beneath them. Farmland and roads and the small grid of downtown spreading out like a life Lucas was actually living now. "You're different," James said. "Different how?" "Like you're actually here, not like you're waiting to disappear." Lucas didn't know what to say to that. He looked at James in the failing light, at the lines on his face that had softened somehow, at the way his hands held the Ferris wheel railing like he was grounding himself. "You saved me," Lucas said. "No," James said. "You saved yourself. I just didn't let you do it alone." The Ferris wheel came around again. The town rotated beneath them. For the first time, Lucas could imagine a future that didn't involve a bridge and a note. He could imagine days after this day, and days after those days. He could imagine staying. One night in June, James was making dinner, something he'd started doing more of, and Lucas came into the kitchen and just stood there. James turned from the stove. "What?" James asked. "I love you," Lucas said. Not romantic, just true. The kind of true that builds slowly without drama, until it's just part of the landscape of who you are. James set down his spoon. He crossed the kitchen and pulled Lucas into a hug. Real, firm, grounding. When he pulled back, his eyes were wet. "I love you too," he said. "I have for a while now." July was hot the way Texas July got. Relentless, heavy, the kind of heat that made the air feel thick. James and Lucas moved slowly through it, the kind of movement that came from knowing how to pace yourself through summer. One afternoon, James asked Lucas to help him clean out the barn. It was a project he'd been putting off for years. Boxes of things from before, papers and photos and items that belonged to a life that no longer existed. In one box, they found Mike's baby clothes. Tiny shirts with farm animals on them, socks that had never been worn. James held them for a long moment, then carefully folded them and set them aside. "He was so small," James said. "I remember holding him, and he fit in my hands. I was terrified I'd break him." Lucas didn't say anything. He just sat next to James and waited. "I thought that was the worst part," James continued. "Losing someone you created, someone you were responsible for keeping safe. I thought that was the limit of what a person could survive." He looked at Lucas. "Then I found you on a bridge, and I realized the worst part is thinking you can't save them. But sometimes, not always, but sometimes, you can." Lucas moved closer. Not afraid now, just moving towards something solid and real. They didn't kiss. Not that day. It wasn't like that yet. Instead, James pulled Lucas against him and they sat on the barn floor surrounded by the artifacts of a grief that was slowly, finally, becoming bearable. That night, Lucas called his mother. He'd been avoiding it for months. His phone had sat silent after that first night on the bridge, but something in the afternoon shifted, and he knew he had to try. She answered on the first ring, like she'd been waiting. "Lucas, oh my God, Lucas, where have you been? We've been so worried." "Mom, I'm okay. Where are you? Are you coming home?" "I'm at a farm, outside of town. I'm staying with someone. His name is James." There was a long silence. "What do you mean, staying with someone?" "Lucas, your father wants to." "I don't care what he wants," Lucas said. He didn't yell it. It just came out, clear and simple. "I'm okay, Mom. Actually okay. For the first time, I'm somewhere that makes sense. With someone who sees me. Lucas, I love you, but I can't come back. Not to that house, not to that. I'm building something else." He hung up before she could respond. His hands were shaking, but not the bad kind of shaking. The kind that comes from choosing yourself and surviving it. James was waiting on the porch. He'd heard the conversation, not the words, but the tone. "You told her," James said. "I told her I'm staying." James nodded like this was the only possible outcome. He handed Lucas a beer and they watched the sun set over the land that Lucas now knew in detail that he'd helped to build back into something alive. "My therapist in the city told me that rejection repeats until you believe it," Lucas said. "That's why I believed it for my family, but it doesn't have to keep repeating." "No," James said. "It doesn't." They sat in silence as the light changed, as the heat of the day began to release into evening. Somewhere inside the house, a fan hummed. Somewhere in the distance, cattle called. Life continuing. "Your family now," James said. Lucas understood then that this wasn't about romance or passion or any of the things the world had taught him to expect from a relationship. This was something deeper. A person choosing you, seeing you, and deciding that you matter. This was salvation that looked like coffee in the morning and work beside you, and the simple act of showing up, day after day, proving that you're not alone. "Thank you," Lucas whispered. "No," James said. "Thank you." And the night came down soft and warm around them, holding them both in its gentleness. Finally safe. 8 months later, the bridge was empty again. Lucas sometimes drove past it on his way into town, but he didn't stop. That place belonged to someone he used to be. Someone desperate. Someone who couldn't see past the next moment. He was different now. Not healed completely. Healing didn't work like that. But alive in a way that felt sustainable. Real. Like it could last. He and James had settled into a life that looked ordinary from the outside. They worked the farm. Lucas had moved from the diner to helping manage James's land investments. Turned out he was good with numbers, good with planning. James had started smiling more, which had made Catherine absolutely unbearable at Sunday dinners because she kept saying, "I told you so, I told you so," while their nephew rolled his eyes. The house that used to feel empty now felt full. There were groceries in the fridge that they'd chosen together. There were inside jokes that made no sense to anyone else. There was the easy kind of love that didn't announce itself, that just showed up in small gestures. James leaving Lucas's favorite coffee on the counter. Lucas fixing the fence by himself and James nodding when he came home, which was his way of saying well done. What started on a bridge as salvation had become something steadier, a family. Not the family Lucas was born into, but the family he'd chosen and been chosen by in return. Sometimes Lucas thought about that night, about how small the margin was between stepping back from the rail and not stepping back, about how James's truck had been heading home, how he could have turned down a different road and never found Lucas at all, about chance and timing and the strange mercy of being seen by the right person at exactly the right moment. But mostly he just lived. He lived in the morning light of a Texas farm. He lived in the quiet